Dan. Thanks so much for sharing your message with us today.
Owens, thanks for having me.
Before we talk about strategic messaging, would you share a bit about your leadership journey? Where did you start and how did you get to where you are today?
Well, when I first started out, I swore I would never be a school teacher. I didn't want to be a school teacher. So obviously, I had no clue I was going to become a school superintendent. My mom talked me into becoming a teacher because she said, we'd get our summers off. And I'm on year 24 and I've yet to have a summer off. So that's the first time I can remember my mom lied to me. So we always have those conversations about that. But I went at my leadership journey is very traditional. I started out as a classroom teacher, then moved to an instructional technologist. And that's not where, your technology maintenance, technicians, instructional technology, when I went into that field and got my master's in, was that's how we were really focused in public education on how to help teachers integrate technology. I was really engaged with that. I really enjoyed doing that. And then after that, I became an assistant principal at a middle school. Um, and I remember arriving at the school the day after Thanksgiving that year. And my principal said, "Oh, you're over buses." I knew nothing about buses except they were yellow and they transported kids. That was the extent. So, I had to learn that very quickly. And then I became principal there at the middle school. And then I was in so all of this is happening in North Carolina. In North Carolina, there's no SBDMs, and the superintendent can move you wherever he or she wanted you to move. So we were very successful at the middle school level. We really increased test scores there. And then my superintendent, I was actually going to um, a, a dissertation conference in Florida. And when I landed, my superintendent called me and told me when I landed back in Raleigh, North Carolina, to pack my bags. I was moving to the high school to be a high school principal. And that had just been placed in turnaround. And I stayed there for 5 years. I really enjoyed that. I really picked up. I think that's where I really learned that I was really into this turnaround transformation work, that change agent. I think that's my skill set. So after that, I spent 5 years a high school principal, which was very successful. We exited turnaround status in 2 years, which was a record. We increased AP programs, career and technical programs, and we really focused on really building that whole school approach where kids could really um, take classes that their passions and interests were really in. And after that, the same superintendent moved me to the central office as an assistant superintendent. I tell people this all the time. Um, I've had really great jobs. That's the worst job I've ever had in my life. And so I would not encourage that anyone to take an assistant superintendent's job. There I was over administrative services. I learned a lot about HR, maintenance, buses, nurses, athletics there. And then, KSBA called one day and said, "Hey, we saw that uh, you had a job, an application in to this umbrella where North Carolina, Kentucky were all part of the National School Board Association at the time." So they picked up my application, and I'd never been to Kentucky, and I'm the wrong color of blue. But it all worked out, and I've been here in Fleming County since 2014, which is, I tell people I've got the best job in Kentucky, and I really mean that. The board really provides me an opportunity to do my job, really allows me to be progressive and innovative. And I have a great team at the district office, five great principals, and I get to work with phenomenal faculty and staff and students in a community.
Well, there's been this obvious shift for superintendents coming out of the pandemic in terms of communication style. You're a master of communication. You're probably our state's most effective communicator, superintendent. So superintendents used to be expected to be really strong and effective communicators. But now there's this necessity for superintendents to be strategic messengers. What does that mean to you?
So I think right now, to be a good communicator, I think there's this inherent requirement that you have to always lean towards transparency, that it's got to be really the first thing you think of is, how can we be transparent with the information is up to what's legal. And while, we're protecting everybody's identity as much as possible. And I think that's where, leaders really get this wrong right now. And that's just not in public education, but in all sectors. We see so many organizations, including public education, we're getting just really slaughtered by the public because of this belief that we're not being transparent with information. So I think I think to be a strategic communicator, you've got to have that desire, that expectation that you're always going to be as transparent as possible with the information. And I think that's number one. And number two, it's always got to be timely. You can't be an effective communicator 2 days after the fact. And we see this. We see this play out every day in headlines, no matter what newspaper or magazine or news TV show you're watching. Too often we're way late with the information, and we need to really try to get that information out as fast as possible. You need to make sure the information is correct, and so you have some leeway there, some time, but waiting 24 hours or 48 hours or sometimes 72 hours really jeopardizes that number one thing of transparency, because people are saying, oh, they're trying to figure out how to cover it up. So those two things, I think if superintendents, aspiring superintendents, principals can really start with transparency and then make sure it's as in real time as possible, I think you save yourself and save the district and save a lot of headache down the road. But one of the things, Owens, I always tell people, is sort of like the biblical story of Noah. Noah didn't build the ark after the flood. He built it before the flood. And also, you can't buy car insurance after a wreck. It doesn't work that way. So if for some reason, and we've learned this through COVID, I mean, it really highlighted this big void of transparency that was really in public education, but it was being masked somehow. But it really seeped out with COVID. So we had a lot of districts, not just here in Kentucky, but across the nation. The number one thing that we really failed at was transparency. And we tried to be transparent, but parents in the community weren't buying it because we hadn't been transparent before. So you can't just turn that on and think, oh, I'm going to tell the people I'm going to be or the community I'm going to be transparent, and you've never been transparent. I mean, they pick that up very quickly, and it just damages. Really, I think communication and transparency really damages, or really helps you lead, but it can also damage your superintendency if you're not, if you're not transparent, if you're not in real time sharing information. And I think you have to be real. Just be real. Being very, authentic, that you're authentically transparent, not that you just transparent when you want to be.
So the idea of being a strategic messenger means that you also have to really sometimes be ahead of the message, or ahead because others are going to tell that story.
That's
Can you
right.
share a little bit about, about being able to beat the student cell phone
Yeah.
in this? How do you, is it a matter of having a plan in place that you implement each time, or how do you approach that when something happens, being able to counter? Sometimes you have to counter strategically. Can you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah, so I always use this phrase, if you don't control PR, PR is going to control you. So that really requires us to be really on top of information as much as possible. And as superintendents or aspiring superintendents, we've got to really make sure that our staffs understand just how critical information is up and down the ladder, meaning that if there's something happening, uh, your supervisor, your superintendent, your assistant superintendent, or your principal really needs to know about that so that they can make that determination of how much information needs to be released and how quick that information needs to be released. One of the things that I learned just from working with superintendents and a principal that trained me as an AP was that always notify the board members if there's something going on, even if we have an ambulance coming to the school, just because maybe a student had maybe some kind of, the student fainted for diabetic reasons or something. I always let the board members know, hey, we've got it under control. The parents have been contacted. There's an ambulance on site, but we're addressing it and we're trying to get that student help. It solves a lot of problems there too, because we know that board members are going to be contacted. Hey, why is there a ambulance out in front of Smith County High School? So that is really key of making sure information is flowing up and down the way it needs to be. But I will tell you, if one of the things that I learned from the principal and superintendent that I worked for is, especially as an assistant superintendent, they both wanted me to, they said, I want you to watch me. I do some great things, but I also mess up. Those are the things I really want you to pay attention to.
Mm.
And most of those things were the lack of communication because they were very old school. I mean, they were, when I was an assistant superintendent, the superintendent was 77 years old. So just think
Oh,
when his career started, they didn't have cell phones. They didn't have, social media. They barely had, I don't even think they probably had a computer. It was a typewriter. So just think how much the world of public education had evolved and now what we're dealing with. So I think it's just, you've got to understand that, what's at your fingertips in terms of technology on how to release that information, how quick you can get that information out, and what mediums of communication really your community buys into. Facebook is ours. We have all the social media accounts, but Facebook is your number one. And now we can really get information out through texting because parents really appreciate that as well because they can be somewhere and they can just look down at their text without having to go into social media. But I think the variety of tools, you've got to know that. You've got to know your community where they prefer to get information from.